Welcome to Unforbidden Truth. I'm Andrew. Today I'll be speaking with Peter Vronsky. Peter Vronsky is a Canadian author, investigative historian, and filmmaker specializing in criminal justice history and espionage. He holds a PhD from the University of Toronto and is widely recognized for his best-selling true crime works, including Serial Killers, The Method and Madness of Monsters, 2004, Female Serial Killers, How and Why Women Become Monsters, 2007, and Sons of Cain, A History of Serial Killers from the Stone Age to Present, 2018, which was named a New York Times Editor's Choice. His most recent book, American Serial Killers, The Epidemic Years, 1950 to 2000, explores the rise of serial murder in the United States during the second half of the 20th century. In addition to publishing his books, Peter has directed several feature films, including Bad Company, 1980, and Mondo Moscow, 1992, and has produced new media and video art pieces featured internationally. His professional career also spans decades in television and documentary filmmaking, where he worked as a producer with major networks such as CNN, CBC, CTV, and RAI. His work has taken him across North America and internationally, covering topics ranging from political conflict to subculture and crime. Peter has lectured at Toronto Metropolitan University, where he taught courses on international relations, terrorism, espionage, the American Civil War, and the Third Reich. He also serves as a consultant to various law enforcement agencies, including the NYPD and New York State Police, providing expertise in cold case homicide investigations. Here's my interview with Peter Vronsky.
Sure. I'm Peter Vronsky. I'm a forensic historian, and I'm working with serial killer Richard Cottingham, who is an incarcerated serial killer, incarcerated since 1980.
So, can you give me some background when it comes to your career and some of your accomplishments?
Well, I mean, I've had many lives. I started off as a journalist. I was doing a lot of documentary films, a lot of travel. I ended up maybe witnessing a little bit too much history, and so in my 50s, I took a decade off, and I got a history degree. My field is espionage in international relations. And of course, what does that have to do with serial killers? Well, spies are actually serial perpetrators. I'm talking about not intelligence officers, ranking operatives. I'm talking about spies who betray their own country. Often they have a very similar type of pathology. They often will cover their tracks in a similar way. So definitely, there was some useful stuff for me to be dealing with this particular serial killer, and I had some in my past as a journalist. I had some random encounters with serial killers as I was traveling, and that certainly made me think about where they came from and what was their origin. And of course, when I first ran into obviously the serial killer, Richard Cottingham, the one that I am working with, and primarily because I had that random encounter with him in '79 that gave me an extra key, I guess, to accessing him. And so we kind of bonded on that in a way, and of course his victim's daughter as well introduced me to him and actually brought me in. So I was I'm a professional historian, but I was writing trade books about the history of serial homicide. I started writing before I got my degree in history, in fact, and so almost like a sideline. um, it's not what I teach. Like I said, espionage, military history is my field, but I guess I have two lives: a night job and a day job. I don't know which is which. Maybe three jobs, because of course I'm writing books about true crime books about serial homicide. I've written now four books, starting from Serial Killers: The Method and Madness of monsters to my last book, American serial killers, and my favorite, Sons of Cain, and female serial killers. So I have quite a, well, not compared to Catherine Ramsland, for example, who's got like 36 books. How the hell did she ever do that?
Right. I
I
think it's
got
more like
four
60
books
something,
I
honestly.
slogged through, right? But still, it's nice, and it's all focused on history, and in a way, my vision was shaped of serial killers in a way that when I encountered the first one in 1979, of course, the word serial killer was not being used at that time. And so for me, stripped of everything that we learned about the serial killers in the subsequent decade and the work that the mine hunters were doing and how that term was defined and all the classifications that came with it, I started without any of that. For me, they were like Alfred Hitchcock movie monsters. I mean, we had serial killers, we just never called them that. And I mean, we had the Boston Strangler and Ed Gein, and there's nothing new about them. We just didn't call them serial killers, and we didn't have those concepts of how to classify them, and there was no systemic profiling. People were profiling, but it was, like Brussels, famous Dr. Brussels. It was, profiler by profiler, essentially. So I kind of bridged that in my experience, and that's how I ended up around 2000. I wrote my first book. It took me a while because I'm not a writer. I never thought I was a filmmaker, essentially, and you become a filmmaker because you can't spell, right? So, you know, now with uh, autocorrect and word perfect and that software, it corrected my spelling, so I began to write a little more than I used to write when I was a filmmaker. So I never thought I'd write books, but there you go. I have, and I am, and I never wanted to meet any serial killers either when I was writing. I saw a lot of videos of interviews with serial killers, and all the questions that people asked them were essentially the same questions I would have asked. So there wasn't anything that I wanted to, go find a serial killer and ask him. And all the answers that I saw were very unsatisfactory as well. So those books I wrote without going in and seeing any serial killers, and so the only incarcerated serial killer I've been interviewing is this one guy, Cottingham, and he's a whale. Um, he's a whale. I don't know where this is going to go. I keep delaying my book, year by year, month by month, and my new deadline is January. I really wanted to meet the July deadline. I've been on this now 6 years. I speak with him every day, almost every day. He calls me. Certainly before COVID, I used to go in and see him in Trenton State Prison when he was incarcerated there. And in the process, myself and the late Jennifer Weiss, we ended up being involved in 9 cold case closures. He confessed to um, multiple of cases since 2010. He began confessing. He was originally convicted back in between 1981 and 1984. There was a series of trials, 2 in New Jersey and then 1 in New York, and he was convicted for 5 murders back then. And then he dropped off the map. He vanished. He stopped talking. He always denied having committed those murders, claimed that he was framed, just wouldn't talk to anybody. And interestingly enough, when you look at Cottingham and Ted Bundy are 18 hours apart in age.
Hmm.
And yet, when you say, name me any average person on the street, name me a serial killer, it's going to be, Jack the Ripper and Ted Bundy and, the Boston Strangler probably, and John Wayne Gacy. Just anybody would name those individuals. Nobody talks about Cottingham, and yet Cottingham, I suspect, murdered more people than perhaps any serial killer that we know of right now. Probably more than Samuel Little. And he really didn't start confessing until 2010 to the other murders. So he went in for 5. He confessed to a 6th one in 2010, and then he started blurting out confessions. And 3 more were closed before I arrived at the scene. And then from 2017 onwards with Jennifer, he confessed to 9 more. And so when I first met him, he was in for 6 murders. He's now in for 18, and 9 of them I had a direct, and Jennifer had a direct role in getting closed.
So speaking of Jennifer, tell me how you met her, what she was like, and what part she played in your work with Richard Cottingham.
Jennifer is the daughter of Didea Godarzi, the biological daughter. That's one of the 2 women that were murdered by Cottingham in the infamous Torso murders in New York. He killed these 2 women who were sex workers in this motel room on 42nd Street. He he tortured them. After he killed them, he cut their heads off and their hands, bagged them, set the torsos on fire, and walked away and buried the heads. They were never found and still have not been found. Didea was identified because Cottingham left her shoes behind. Something that's unusual for him because usually he would take all the evidence away, including the women's clothing. But here he got sloppy. He left the shoes behind, and the shoes were only sold in very few Bamberger stores. So they traced the shoes to a store in New Jersey, and she also had a cesarean scar. And so here you have a head with no, a torso with no head, no hands, but a cesarean scar and shoes from New Jersey. And so cops started looking like who's missing, maybe, that has a child. And of course, that's how they identified Didea Godarzi. And she was a Iranian national, although the canonical history newspapers reported her as being Kuwaiti. She wasn't. She was born in Kuwait to certainly an Iranian father who was working there, and he brought her back to Iran. She was being brought up to Iran. He came to the United States in the early '60s. He was kind of an opponent to the Shah. So all this is pre-Islamic Revolution Iran. And eventually, when she was 14, he went back to Iran and he brought her back. We don't know what happened to the mother. They divorced, and the mother didn't keep custody. So they made some deal. The mother, I think, was from the Netherlands, and so we never really found her. So Jennifer was adopted, and I always wondered. I knew that there was a child, an infant that was born about 18 months before Dita was murdered. And I always wondered what happened to the infant, and um, did she know what happened to her mother, and did she disappear kind of in the maw of the adoption system and foster? Was it going to be some kind of nightmare story? And sure enough, one day, 2017 in the springtime, she calls me up and introduces herself. And the woman I was always wondering about for 10 years, maybe more. So I wrote the book around 2002, 2004. And so she introduced herself to me, and of course I knew of her. and we started talking about Nadia Fitzani, who went to see Richard Cottingham in 2009. And she was a Canadian journalist, and she was the first one to actually get Cottingham talking. And she too resembled Didea. She was Tunisian, and so she had this olive skin color tone to her. She was dark in that way, and Cottingham likes, despite again what you read about Cottingham's predilection for blondes, Cottingham actually likes brunettes and dark-haired women, and right away, for some reason, he saw Nadia almost as a kind of a reincarnation of Gila Godarzi, who he had a long relationship with. He knew her. Um, he had both a professional, as you know, he was her client, but they also had a friendship in those years. So here was Jennifer now, actually Diva's daughter, and she wants to find the heads. Where are the heads? And of course, we want to find the other head because the other girl was never identified, a teenage girl, and with a rare blood type. And so we wanted to find the severed heads. He told us where he buried them, more or less. Remarkably, NYPD got involved very easily. There was a kind of a very diligent detective there, William Bill Simon, on the cold case squad. He's retired since in frustration, but Bill right away got involved in the case for the sake of identifying the other girl, because they didn't need the heads. Cottingham was already convicted for those murders. So it wasn't like we brought them evidence for something new. They didn't need it. But NYPD, this was, of course, in the old days, in the pre-COVID days, and different political era, NYPD was very committed to trying to find that girl and hopefully identify her. And they still are, but it's not the kind of priority they were able to make it in 2018, 2019. There was a different world back then. And so we conducted the first search, and we've been doing searches annually, trying to still find those heads. And I think we're getting closer, partly as the issue with Cottingham's memory. He does have a geriatric memory. He has bad days and good days. He's not in very good health. And there's a lot of murders on his hands, and it's a very slow process. Solving the cases is easy. Getting them closed is hard. And so I know that Cottingham, I know of about, I'd say, roughly 36 murders that he committed. And out of the 85 to 100 he claims, and claims plausibly. And so 36 I'm pretty clear about maybe 11 of them are under active investigation with different jurisdictions. Some I'm assisting in, some rather not deal with a civilian or with somebody from outside law enforcement. And so different jurisdictions will deal with it in different ways. But cold cases are very hard. People are very reluctant to engage in them, and that's one of the reasons that certainly Bill Simon resigned from the NYPD 2 years ago. It just wasn't, the cold case squad wasn't getting the kind of support they used to have in the old days. It's a new squad. It was only formed by the guy who kind of inspired it was a detective, Wendell Stratford, who's now retired as well. But it was only formed, I think, 1996 or 1994. I believe 1996. So it was something new. And there's about, if you look at the killing years, between 1960 and 1980, there's about 11,000 unsolved homicides in New York. That's a lot of murderers walking around. That's a lot of cold cases, and so the '90s were the worst. And so when you talk about cold cases, often what they really want is a cold case that is maybe 10 years ago, 12 years ago. Nobody wants to investigate 30 years and 40 years, which is what Cottingham's murders are ranging on. I believe his first murder was 1963. Kennedy was still alive. Which again, if you can compare him to Ted Bundy, Cottingham is incredibly precocious. Um, Cottingham is doing what Ted Bundy was going to do, but he was doing it when Ted Bundy was still only shoplifting at his best. So I kind of describe Cottingham that Cottingham was Ted Bundy before Ted Bundy was Ted Bundy. He did the shopping mall thing, posing as a private detective, as a shoplifting detective, right? That's how he lured women into cars, the way Ted Bundy failed to do. He attempted to do, that famous. He tries to lure a woman into his Volkswagen, pretending that he's a detective that something's wrong with her car. I think was that somebody attempted to steal her tires or something. Was Bundy's routine. Cottingham did the same thing. Targeted women often in shopping malls. He would abduct them in their own car. So he definitely had a pattern that became recognizable. And today, of course, as I track his many suspected cases, it's much more obvious to me than was to anybody back then.
So, out of hundreds of potential serial killers that you could have contacted to work with, why did you choose Cottingham out of all of them?
Well, he chose me. Jennifer chose me. Like I said, I didn't want to meet any serial killers. I had no intention. And Jennifer reached out to me. And of course, I had that connection with Cottingham in the sense that he was the one I ran into by accident as he was fleeing the Torso murders. I mean, um, I believe that Cottingham hit me getting off the elevator with a bag with Jennifer's mom's head in it. That's how close I got to the case. I was 23 years old and I was stranded in New York. And Sunday morning, December 2nd, 1979, as Cottingham is fleeing the hotel, having set the room upstairs on fire, the torsos, I'm trying to check into that hotel. And so we collided in the elevator doors. And he annoyed me. He annoyed me because he held up the elevator. I'm there, hitting the elevator button, and the elevator is up there on the fourth floor. Like, what the hell? What jerk off is holding up the elevator? How long does it take you to get on an elevator? I want to take a look at this place, see if I want to stay there. And so probably was maybe 60 seconds, 70 seconds, but it seemed like forever. you know, I'm young, I'm impatient, I'm from Toronto, so New York is a I'm there on a trip, on an exotic trip, but I'm stranded. I'm on a mission there for a film company, and so I want to enjoy myself while I have the time. I don't want to be standing pushing an elevator button, and so I'm annoyed. This guy annoys me, and so when he comes down, I give him a hard look, right? And so when I went up to his floor, I smelt the fire, and I probably was there maybe 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and then there was the alarm started, and housekeeping was forcing everybody out of the hotel off the floor. I smelt stuff, but I didn't see any flames, and it's only at the end I saw some smoke just curling along the ceiling of the hallway, right? And so I knew it was a fire now, and there were all those nightmare stories about high-rise hotel fires. So I knew what to do. Don't get on the elevator, go down the stairs. I went down the stairs and out the door, and the fire department was just arriving as I was leaving. And so yeah, I said, I'm not staying here, right? I'll go somewhere else. And I don't remember where I stayed, but I didn't know what happened. And so I got to my destination, a film laboratory, the next morning, and I'm in the lobby, and there are newspapers in the lobby. I'm there to pick up motion picture film that was processed, right, to bring it back to Toronto. And so in the newspapers, I see the story that the hotel I was at, there was a fire and it was two prostitutes burnt, their torsos burnt. They already identified them as sex workers, right? Two prostitutes from the Times Square area, which they weren't, but that's how the newspapers reported it. Burned, set on fire. I go, my God, that's what I was in. But again, not having that word serial killer, when you think serial killer, you think the guy next door, the nosy neighbor, the quirky guy at work, the stranger on the elevator, right? None of those concepts existed. They were all monsters back then. And so the guy on the elevator, I never thought about him until I saw his picture, maybe 18 months or 2 years later, when he went on trial after he was arrested. So that was also a kind of a surrealistic experience. It was like, like layers of an onion getting peeled as I kept discovering what the hell I was in. So I didn't know for the first 24 hours that I was at a crime scene until the next morning.
Hmm. That's crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy. It is crazy, and because I then encountered a second serial killer in 1990, also a notorious serial killer in Russia, and turned him down for a TV interview. He wanted to be interviewed about something else. So I write about both these guys in my book, Method and Madness of Monsters. I described meeting these two people, but it made me wonder, like, what's wrong with me? And right? Okay, you can get struck by lightning once. You meet a serial killer. I just happened to find out who my serial killer was at random. Okay, but now it's two. Now it's two, and the math now starts looking kinky. Right? Like, is this me? But you know, I met at random, um, bumped into or ran into at random when I was a kid, Robert Kennedy in 1967 in Montreal. I met Peter O'Toole on an elevator. I ran into Sammy Davis Jr. in a cigar shop in London, England. I bumped into Andy Warhol in the bar doorway. Uh, Elton John, I ran into on the street coming out of a hair transplant clinic in Toronto, in Yorkville. I mean, all these celebrities that I wasn't seeking out, right? I've driven celebrities as a film worker when I worked as a teamster and as a assistant director. I worked with them, but these were people I ran into at random. So why not a couple of serial killers among them? I mean, I met more movie stars than I did serial killers. Maybe there's a third one or a fourth one. I don't know. Maybe we're all encountering serial killers. We just don't know it, luckily. I just happened to find out which ones were mine. And the same with the guy in Russia, Chikatilo. I didn't know I was talking to a serial killer even after he was arrested, because I was in Russia when he was arrested and put on trial. And it was on live television in Russia, his trial. I didn't recognize the guy, but I had a long conversation with him. Unlike Cottingham on the elevator, who I had a 15-second encounter with, Chikatilo, the Red Ripper, I talked to him for maybe 4 or 5 minutes before I told him to get lost. Right? I was kicking myself after when I realized that's the guy who my cameraman and I kind of brushed off. We didn't want to, we don't have time for your stupid story. Right? You wanted to be interviewed. I could have had Chikatilo, right? 3 minutes, 4 minutes of video with Chikatilo. Unfortunately, he didn't want to talk about serial killing. He had something else he wanted to talk about. And it was a really shit ass crazy story, which is why I told him to get lost. And then I'm writing my book maybe 7 years later, and I go, I got to write about this guy because Chikatilo, in a certain period in the late 1990s, he had the most victims. He had the most confirmed victims. He went in for 53 murders. Okay, so I said I got to write about this guy, obviously, because I was writing about all these different serial killers in my first book. And so as I'm researching his story, I read that he's in Moscow at the same time I am, suspected in murdering somebody in Moscow. And the purpose of his visit to Moscow was why he wanted me to interview him. He was claiming that he was there to protest about a toilet being built outside his apartment windows in Rostov on the Don, where he lived in the Ukraine, and that Gorbachev, he wanted to meet with Gorbachev about the toilets. And so when he wanted me to do a television interview with him about that, I told him, get lost, go away, get away from me, you freak, and so now I'm reading, in the sources. I go, my God, I remember the guy, and I didn't remember his face. Same with Cottingham. If I had known that I had run into a serial killer and then I went to the cops and stuff, right? I saw the guy on the elevator. I couldn't give you a description of him. Couldn't tell you what color eyes he had, whether he had a mustache or anything. So all I remember about Chikatilo was, how his tie, he had a tie, right? And as he was talking, his tie kept bobbing up and down, right? That's the memory I have of him. And he had these big horn rimmed Peter Sellers kind of glasses, all right? And as he got excited, they started fogging up. He was like tearing up and heating up, and his glasses were fogging up, and he looked like some kind of geek, right?
Hmm.
And that's all I could remember, and how he was dressed, not his face, nothing. And like I said, when I saw him on television the next year when he was on trial, of course, he was, his head was shaved. He was acting now crazy. I don't know if you ever saw any of that Chikatilo
Yeah.
footage, but he looked pretty crazy. He's now, you know, he's with the demons, and so I didn't recognize him as the guy I was interviewing. He was in a tent city. We were shooting these protests. This was, of course, an era when people, for the first time, were allowed to protest without the Russian cops just coming in and arresting everybody. And so there were all these mostly old people protesting Gulag crimes and Stalinist era crimes. And he was in the middle of this tent city with his own little tent. And we were interviewing people, and there were horrible stories. And then he started telling me the stupid story about the toilet. Right? So not filming this. And videotape was scarce. If you ran out of videotape in Russia in those years, go try to find, raw videotape, fresh videotape. You had to fly it in from Germany. So it wasn't an easy thing at those days. Now, it's a different story. But back then, everything was scarce. So my cameraman and I had a code where we would pretend to film, not to offend people, right? And the code word, there was a commercial at that time by Kodak, and they show like pictures, and they go, they're selling the Kodak on TV, and the slogan is, it's a Kodak moment. And so my cameraman and I had this code word that, this is going to be a Kodak moment, meant
Hmm.
pretend you're filming, but don't waste any videotape on this mutt. Right? And certainly right away I called Kodak moment on his stupid story.
That's funny.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It is funny. It's frustrating too. I went back because before doing interviews, we just panned everybody. We went up and down all the aisles, and we shot all these sequences. And when we get to him, because he had a low tent, I kind of miss him. We just get the top of his tent. All right. And so I had no fucking video of him. It's one of those lost moments.
Right, right. Yeah, that'd be frustrating later on when you learned who he actually was.
Yeah, but there you go. I'm the guy who turned down Andre Chikatilo for an interview. Yeah, my
Yeah,
reputation. Yeah,
that's crazy.
it is crazy. It's crazy. Those two random encounters. By then, of course, the word serial killer existed. But they made me think, and I had a moment in my life where I was kind of in hiatus between television projects, and I had written so much, like scripts and proposals, and I thought, yeah, I'll take a shot at a book. And I was reading a lot of Harold Schechter's books, and I read Colin Wilson's a Criminal History of Mankind. And so those two books, I said somebody should combine Harold Schechter with Colin Wilson and write a history of serial killers. Not just one case, the way Harold Schechter, he would do, only one case for the entire book, but a whole collection of different kind of serial killers that met different kind of categories, and so that's how I ended up writing Method and Madness of Monsters. There was no book like it out there, and so I covered in Method and Madness. I covered essentially the modern era, like from Jack the Ripper onwards, and then I returned in Sons of Cain to write it back to the prehistoric times. Sons of Cain, of course, the title is a history of serial killers from the Stone Age to the present. And so I started looking at serial killers as werewolves and as vampires, and what we thought were monsters were actually what I describe as secular, not at all supernatural, ordinary serial killers, but we imbued them with these supernatural powers. So I think all our vampire stories and our werewolf stories really go back to actual serial killers. And of course, as a species, animals in the wild are all serial killers. They have to be. If they weren't, um, you know, they would not get very far. And so were humans. We described the kind of the four F's in Sons of Cain necessary for any species to evolve and survive. The F, of course, the first step is flee. Second one is fight. Third one is feed, and the fourth one obviously is to fuck. All right. If any one of those four F's don't kick in, and you're living in the jungle, that's it. Your species will vanish, and we all were in the jungle until about 14,000 years ago, and for a million years we were all out there serial killing, cannibalizing each other. There was no marriage, there was no courting, it was all rape. Obviously, males would have had many females, and so it was about killing, eating, and fucking, right, and running away when you can't do any of the last three things. And of course, come civilization, we're taught that that's wrong, and now, 14,000 years later, some of us still have those instincts, those four F instincts. They're not inhibited. So, when people ask me what makes a serial killer, I actually argue that we're all born as serial killers and we're unmade. It's the rare few that remain with those instincts untamed and uninhibited that end up engaging in serial murder. I mean, what is sadism? Sadism is the aggressive impulse crossed with the reproductive impulse. So it's fight and fuck. And somewhere something's wrong. Maybe it's a head injury, maybe it's psychopathy, Maybe it's trauma. We have all these different theories, but we really don't know. But those four primary impulses, the wires get crossed, and so you have this small, tiny sliver of minority of people who are serial predators and have those instincts. So it's almost going back to the 19th century, the Lombroso school of criminology, where they talked about criminals as being primitive beings. The only thing was that Lombroso thought that you can recognize a criminal just by the shape of their head and their face. All right, so he kind of got the primitive atavist aspect of murder, but it's not as visible as we think it is. Ted Bundy had that primitive atavistic soul, if you want to call it, but he looked, as a totally civilized middle class, he's our postmodern serial killer. He's the one that's like us, you know, creepy Ed Gein and that freak, the Boston Strangler, DeSalvo, all those guys. They weren't like us. Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy wanted, he was a yuppie, upwardly mobile. He was law school, right? He was like the majority of the middle classes, among whom he preyed. And so the atavistic thing, we should rethink Lombroso now, I think. It's you can't physically recognize them, but the theory that this is kind of a primitive instinctual thing that's gone awry, that has not been harnessed by maybe lack of good parenting or bad luck or a combination. It's never one thing. It's always a combination, a cocktail of things. And let's not write off old-fashioned biblical evil, right? I'm not ready yet to take that off the table. We don't know enough about the world to say that there is not, there's no such thing as just supernatural, self-sustaining evil. Forget psychopathy. Forget psychiatrists. Let's go back to the priests, right? Maybe they got it wrong. The guy's just goddamn evil. End the story. Uh,
So, when you do go visit Cottingham, what's an average visit like for you?
the average visit, I don't, I have, I'm due for a visit, but I haven't visited him since COVID. And so the process would be you get um, you get 4 visits a week, 2 window visits, which are very awkward because you're talking on the phone and it's not private. And then you can have on the weekends, you can have contact visits where you sit in a family room, on 2 chairs facing each other, and it's called a contact visit because the visitor can hug, they can touch the inmate. It's for wives and girlfriends and family and so forth, but friends as well. So they're called contact visits, and there's no glass and there's no phone, so you have a certain sense of privacy, and you're sitting in a room with about maybe 40 other visitors. It all happens at the same hour. You line up, they bring you in. So there's like all this chatter around you. People are spaced out on their chairs facing their inmate, and that's how we would converse. So I would get about 90 minutes with him, depending on how impatient the guards were. And you can't take notes. You cannot bring a recorder. You can't bring in a pencil or a piece of paper. Nothing. So I would have to work by memory. And so it got actually better after COVID when he started regularly calling me, and I could record the phone calls, and we could have video visits as well, although they're difficult for him because he's in bad health. So I my visits actually become more intense and more active once I don't see him physically anymore. We're on the phone, and so I probably have around 400 hours of conversation with him. I mean, he's been phoning me daily since 2020, so probably more than 4 hours. Sorry, 400 hours, probably more than that. So he calls me at least 320 days out of the year. There's some days he's in hospital, some days he's being interviewed by cops, so I don't get a call from him. But otherwise, he calls me every day.
So all that audio, is that what you're
Talk about
using?
we talk about all sorts of shit, right? Because I talked to him so long, if you ask him a direct question, he doesn't answer it. His murders come out in kind of nostalgic conversations that he and I bonded over for our love for old New York. I'm 9 years younger than him. And so I started coming to New York in 1973 as a kid, and of course, I see myself personally 7 years of the New York he experienced before he was arrested. And he loved New York. He was very self-conscious that he was, working in New York daily and how special New York was as much as I was. And so we talked about, the music scene and the singles bars and the sex clubs and the deuce and pornography and prostitution in New York. And the 1970s were a wild anarchistic time. I don't know if you saw the TV show The Deuce, but it kind of caught that. And certainly if you saw Taxi Driver, then that is authentic New York of the 1970s. And I fed on it. I made films in there. I did a project about the guardian angels who were vigilantes traveling on the subways, the punk rock scene in New York. So I was doing a lot of independent films in New York. My dream was to live down there, and so I was coming into New York all the time, and it was conceivable that Cottingham and I might have been in the same clubs at the same time, and just didn't meet. But and he would then, when we started talking about things like, hey, Rich, where was the best, we'd argue, like, where was the best pastrami in 1978? Where was the best, and he'd tell me about his favorite pastrami place, and then he remembered how he killed somebody and left their body behind the pastrami place he was going to. That's how his confession started coming out. And so he dropped them at random, and I'd pretend I didn't hear them, but then I'd work my ass to identify the case and get back to him and start now milking him on those specific cases. And that's partly how we closed those 9 cases.
So was it a total of 9 cases that have been closed, or have there been other cases that he's been linked to that have been closed?
No, the 9 that I was involved in. But again, he was convicted for, he was convicted 5 first. 2010, he confessed to 1, so that's 6. Then 3 were closed before I arrived, so that's 9. And then the 9 that we did. There's your 18. So I came in for the last 9 with Jennifer.
Okay,
Uh,
okay.
three, 3 in Bergen County, New Jersey, including a double murder. 5 in Nassau County, Long Island, and 1 in Rockland County up in the towards the Hudson Valley. Um, 1 case there. So that's how the 9 came together.
So do you know how many total murders he's responsible for?
He says 85 to 100, and I believe him. At the rate, let's say if we take the first murder that we confirmed, which is Marianne de la Sala in January 1967. That's confirmed. That's closed case. And he's arrested in May 1980. So if you take January 67 to May 1980 and you split it into 100, you get one murder every 6 weeks. That's entirely doable, especially in the days before profiling, before DNA, before cell phones, before digital databases, before the word serial killer existed. Easy. Nobody knew there was even a serial killer out there. He killed those 100 women. Nobody connected any of the cases, except for a few journalists in New Jersey. He killed some teenage girls, one after another, in Bergen County over a period of about maybe 20 months, almost 2 years. And some journalists began asking questions. All these teenage girls, schoolgirls, getting murdered. Could this be the same person? And of course the police, no, 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 no. One was strangled, but the other one was suffocated, so it can't be the same guy. I mean, that's how cops thought in those days. And he varied his method deliberately. He strangled some, he drowned some, he smothered others, he beat to death some. He would move around. He would cluster them in different places. His youngest confirmed victim is 13. His oldest confirmed victim is, I think, 31. So there was a huge age range. He killed he was an African American victim. So he crossed racial lines. Only 30% of his victims were sex workers, too. The other, 70% essentially, a little bit under, were schoolgirls or employed women or housewives, mothers. So it wasn't like he was targeting prostitutes in particular. And he was an equal opportunity murderer, no question about that. So 100, he says between 85 and 100, and like I said, I have about 36 that he'll confess to. Struggle to get him to, have his Miranda rights read to him. Because the moment any cop tries to read him his Miranda rights, he shuts the fuck up. Right? And nobody can force him into an interview. I mean, there's police that arrived from across the U.S. and arrived in his prison to talk to him, and he told him to go home. I'm not talking to you. And know any cop who tries to read him his Miranda rights. Do you understand your Miranda rights? And he goes, no, I don't understand them at all. And the cop can't do anything. The guy's denied, he won't acknowledge his Miranda rights, and so whatever confession the cop gets out of him is useless. Cottingham knows that. He's a very, he's a jailhouse lawyer, right? So, one cop not that long ago tried. Well, that's okay, but you know what I mean about you understand your Miranda rights. And Cottingham, no, I don't know what that means. What is a Miranda right? So he's crafty. He's crafty, and Robert Angelotti, the chief, who worked him from 2004 until he retired in 2021. Extracted how many confessions? Extracted 4 confessions without me, and then another 3 with me. Right? He worked Cottingham from 2004 until 2021. So that's nearly 20 years. His entire career. He started off as a sergeant when he went to first see Cottingham in Trenton, and when he retired in 2021, he was the chief of the Bergen County Prosecutor's Office detectives, the investigation. squad. And Rob closed, like I said, Rob closed. I keep losing count. Four, and through 7 cases he closed in that period. Very, very slowly, because Cottingham, he likes to talk, and we entertain each other too, because serial killers get bored very easily. If you can't entertain them, it's hard to keep their attention. So we shoot the shit like two old men. Essentially, we um, grumble and we complain about the world, and I make jokes about how lucky he is to be inside, not to be outside, right? And how it sucks lining up at the bank, and how much a pizza costs these days. He's still he's connected to the world through television, and so that's all he does is just watch TV all day, all night, right? So he knows the world out there. He sees commercials, but he's still shocked at how much a hamburger costs, or a beer, or a quart of milk, and shit, and what it's like on the street, and the dating scene, and sometimes he has these fantasies of what it would have been like for him to be a serial killer with DNA and with cell phones out there, and whether he would have been able to get away with things the way he was able to get away with it. I mean, he got away. He was caught by accident. There was nobody looking for him. There was no task force. Nobody knew there was a serial killer. He got caught torturing a woman in a motel room, and hotel security brought the police to the door. That's how he was arrested. And Cottingham, the mistake Cottingham was that he brought this woman back to the same motel where he murdered another woman 19 days earlier. He left her stuffed under the bed, and now he comes back to the same motel with another victim, and so the hotel room staff are spooked from the murder, and when they hear the woman screaming, they right away they react. They might not have, previously, and so they call in security, and security calls in the police, and Cottingham is literally caught red-handed with this victim. They rescue the victim. She'll testify at trial. And of course, right away, the cops go, "Whoa, isn't that interesting? We found another girl here 19 days ago stuffed under the bed. What if it's this guy?" And 3 years earlier, he left a woman in the parking lot of that same hotel. So once they started pulling on those strings, and oh yeah, he's doing stuff in hotel rooms. Wasn't there some murders in New York, right? And so all those 5 cases, 5 murders came in. 2 murders in New Jersey, 3 in New York City, and that's what he was put away for. In like I said, a couple of trials in New Jersey. For two different, they tried the 2 murders in New Jersey separately, and then New York tried him for all 3 murders, the torso murders, and then there was another woman who he murdered in the Seville Hotel on Madison Avenue, set her torso on fire too. And instead of cutting off her head, he cut off her breasts and left her breasts posed on the bed. And he varied that too. Like those mutilation murders were just something he was doing for New York City. In New Jersey, right, the murders were so different that at first nobody thought it was the same guy.
So what inevitably linked him? Did he just confess, or did they have evidence? Like what was it that connected him to the 5 cases after he got caught torturing that woman?
Those 5 cases, it was circumstantial, entirely circumstantial. Uh, Dennis Kalo, who was the prosecutor in New Jersey, did a very unique prosecution for that time. He talked about signature evidence. Kalo, I got to say, he was so far ahead of the ball in saying that there's a difference between MO and signature, And even though the 5 murders are all apparently seem different in the MO, the signature is the same. And they had only one fingerprint from him. And the chain of custody was, if that went to trial today, they probably would have thrown out that fingerprint. The chain of custody was had been breached, but they wanted to put him away. They really did. And so the argument with that one fingerprint, that's it. That's all they had. The argument was that his signature was obvious, and the jury was scared enough. Plus, they had 3 surviving witnesses, 4 witnesses testifying too, describing what he did to them. Because a lot of his women survived. He probably abducted maybe 1,000 women over that period, but very few of them reported it. Most women didn't. They just didn't want to, deal with it, and rape in those days was classified in very different ways. So I found all these cases from his descriptions. Later, I traced them back to newspaper reports that were never, even the victims they can't identify anymore. When I went to NYPD about a number of cases in New York, they went to look for the case files, but they were gone. Right? These weren't even homicides; these were rapes. So they didn't even know the name of the victim anymore, and it wasn't reported in the newspaper. So a lot of women didn't report his crimes, and a lot of them walked away alive. So 4 of them, like I said, testified against him and described what he did to them, and so forth. And that was his thing about. He said, he once said to me, he said, killing someone doesn't make you God. Knowing whether they live or die does that. And so he played God, and in order to have those God powers, he had to leave some of them to live. Otherwise, he's not God. And so he left all the most of the women he abducted were left alive. He only killed probably 10% of his victims, and it was for all sorts of reasons. I mean, one girl he killed because she lied to him. She told him that she was a vegetarian, but then several hours later she orders a cheeseburger. Killed her. Right? Can't trust her. One woman made her joke. He was going to let her go. He wanted to let her go. He liked her. And he said to her, he says, I guess you're going to call the cops now if I let you go. And she was, a tough woman, and she wisecracked. She said, "No, I'm going to have a shower first. Then I'm going to call the cops." That's how she ended up dead. He said if she hadn't said that to him, he would have let her go.
So basically, so he killed these women to cover up the rapes, right? Essentially.
It was one of the things. I mean, he had a kind of a random instinctual, whimsical, whether I'm in the mood, filtering system as to who he killed, who he let live. Right? If there's something about the girl he liked, and he felt it was safe, that she wouldn't be able to identify him or find him, he would let them go. He wasn't out there killing. The killing part was a chore for him. For him, it was the abduction, the control over the women. That's what he was looking for. The killing was like almost an afterthought, something he had to do. So he doesn't describe the killing as giving him any kind of particular um, pleasure, or wasn't why he was out there. He wasn't out there to kill them. He was out there to abduct them. As he would put it, fuck with them and keep them under control. He also said he liked meeting new people. This was a way to get to meet new women and get to know them. He said to me with a straight face, he said to me, when you hold someone prisoner, they tell you the most amazing things. You get to really know them when you hold them prisoner. All right.
Hmm.
Okay. Mm.
So you're currently writing a book called American Werewolf: The Life and Crimes of Richard Cottingham, the last serial killer on the left. Can you tell me what that book's all about and what people can expect to
Yeah,
read
it's
when it's
about this.
published?
It's about my meetings with him. It's about him. I'm not sure if the last serial killer on the left. My publisher really hates that title. I don't think it's going to go. And they're not crazy about American Werewolf either. For crying out loud, because of that movie, right? I'm sorry, it's not The Godfather, American
Right.
Werewolf, right? I think Cottingham really is the. I mean, he's not an American Werewolf in London. He's fucking American Werewolf in America, for crying out loud. I keep arguing with my publisher that we're going to redefine the word American Werewolf. And he is lycanthropic. That's why I call him a werewolf, because I believe that Cottingham's behavior is related to a head injury. It's not a behavior disorder or something, like a traumatic thing. It's a physiological brain injury, because he essentially, the core of him is not evil, unless that's the face of evil, right? But I would describe him as a very nice guy, with a quirk. He likes to cut off women's heads and set their torsos on fire. But other than that, he's like you and me. know, there's nothing twitchy about him. There's no flights of fantasy. I watched those interviews with um the I'm just trying to remember his name now. The Long Island serial killer from New York.
Oh,
Um,
Rex Heuermann.
Sorry, what was the name?
Rex Heuermann. I don't know how to say his last
No,
name.
no, that's the recent guy. But there was one in the 1990s. Um, Damn, he had a body that fell out of his pickup truck. That's how the cops caught him. All right, he was a landscape worker. Um, Damn, what
It
was his
wasn't
name?
Joel Rifkin, was it?
Yeah, Joe
Oh,
Rifkin.
Joe
Joe
Rifkin.
Rifkin.
Okay, okay.
Right? You look at those interviews with Joe Rifkin. He does a lot of TV interviews. The guy looks like he's out of it. He's out of his head. There's nothing like that about Cottingham. He's completely what you would describe as normal. He's like your uncle. You know, and so there's nothing twitchy about him. There are no weird flights of fantasy. Nothing. And his values seem to be like my values, like what he thinks is wrong. Um, I agree on. You he loves animals. He loves kids, right? And not in a predatory way. And so he doesn't. He has a very stable family history. He grew up with three younger sisters who adored him and stayed loyal to him and couldn't believe that their older brother was charged with this. They honestly believed he was framed, and so he lived in this middle class family. Not that the middle class necessarily excludes you from this kind of stuff, but there was nothing typical about him that you could compare to other serial killers. You think of Ted Bundy a little bit, and Ted Bundy didn't really have also any kind of like um, the kind of trauma that say Charlie Manson had or, as a child, or Henry Lee Lucas, that kind of childhood, right? Bundy had this kind of middle class childhood, but he had that little thing about he thinking that his mother was his sister, or the other way around, or something. I forgot
Right.
what it was. But there was that kind of little weird thing. And but Cottingham, grows up in unquote normal family in the suburbs, and but I did determine he had a very severe head injury when he was 4 years old. That I confirmed and found. the record on was severe enough that it was reported in the newspapers, and I think that's the key. I think that's the key, and I wish I could get his head into a brain scan to see if there's any scarring on his frontal lobe. Because we now know from the NFL football players, the head trauma, how that changed their behavior. Boxers, right? You get a lot of blows to the front of your head. It does can impact your personality. So it could be. That's the only explanation I have.
Right,
Uh,
right.
yeah, you know.
So, before we conclude this interview, is there anything that you'd like to talk about or plug before we get out of here?
No, I'm no, I'm talked out.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your time today. I've been wanting to talk to you for a couple years now, and I'm glad that we were able to
Oh,
get it
great! I'm
done.
glad we did it. Anytime.
That was my interview with Peter Vronsky. If you like the episodes and would like to listen to them ad-free, head on over to patreon.com/unforbidden-truth. I just opened a new tier on Patreon, which gives you access to ad-free episodes, merchandise from Unforbidden Truth once a month, and digital downloads, which includes legal documents from infamous cases all the way down to nonviolent drug charges. Thank you for listening. See you on the next one.